Hello everybody. Today's video is going to be an explanation of St. Thomas's first way to the existence of God from motion, explained. Alright, and I'm drawing this information from sources which I'll link in the description, but people like Etienne, Gilson, Jacques Maritain, Garrigou, LaGrange, Henri, Grenier, F.C. Copleston, Ed Phaser, okay, and others, some of the great Thomist minds of the 20th century, as well as, of course, from St. Thomas's work and Aristotle's work. All right, so the first thing I'd like to say in explaining St. Thomas's first way is that there's two different accounts of it. Okay, you have a shorter version in the Summa Theologiae, Prima Pars, question 2, article 3. Then you have a longer version in the Summa Contra Gentiles, book 1, chapter 13. All right, and often what happens is that people get confused when they read the version of the Summa Theologiae because it's shorter and therefore open to more ambiguous interpretation. But if you go to the Summa Contra Gentiles, it becomes very clear that his first way is very similar to Aristotle's argument at the end of the physics and then again in the metaphysics for the existence of an unmoved mover. Okay, so that's really the context in which Thomas Aquinas is working in here. Now, things also to point out, right before this passage in the Summa Theologiae, St. Thomas makes some distinctions about what we're trying to do versus what we cannot do here. Okay, the first point is that the existence of God, by definition, is self-evident in itself, meaning the definition of God must include existence, absolute existence. Otherwise, you wouldn't be talking about God or the definition of God. But unfortunately, since we don't see or perceive the essence of God directly from our perspective here on earth, it's not self-evident to us. Okay, so that's an important distinction. It is self-evident in itself, God's essence is his existence, but not to us. We can't see it directly from our perspective. Okay, so we're left with indirect proofs, okay? Aquinas says that God's existence is demonstrable, okay, but from his effects that we can see that are evident to us to their proper cause. Okay, so we come to know God in an indirect way, okay, positing an indirect concept or knowledge of God in place of a direct one, which we don't get in this life. All right, so I think that's important to sort of outline what we can and can't say, or what he is and is not saying here. Okay, one other point on that. He is making the claim, though, that God is a necessary conclusion to explain why the universe exists in the way it exists. Okay, so I do want to point that out. All right, now the first mistake that people usually make, especially if they only read the version from the Summa Theologiae, is that this argument is an argument based in temporal, or what those scholars I previously mentioned called accidental causality. Okay, that we think that God, or that Aquinas is arguing in the first way that God is a first mover in time. Okay, but these scholars clearly say that this is not what Aquinas is arguing for. And in fact, Aquinas says it himself in the Summa Contra Gentiles that he's not arguing for that. He thinks that it's an article of faith, okay, that the universe had a beginning, but he's not going to assume that, doesn't think you can necessarily prove that philosophically, because Aristotle didn't necessarily think you could prove that philosophically. Aristotle believed in everlasting, a potentially infinite universe, okay? An everlasting past, present, and future. So Aquinas says at the end of that passage in Summa Contra Gentiles that he's going to start with that same assumption, okay? And this argument doesn't matter if the universe is everlastingly old or continues everlastingly in the future. That's beside the point. Okay, what is he arguing for then? Well, and this is where it's helpful to know some of Aristotle's physics and metaphysics. He's arguing for a causal chain of dependence of the essences of things on one another. All right, so Aristotle points out that, okay, well, if the universe is everlasting, and this is one of his main critiques in the metaphysics of the atomists, if the universe is everlasting, okay, well then why do the essences of things still exist? Because if you think about it, if everything really is the random interaction of just fundamental particles, and they have everlasting time to interact, okay, why is our universe ordered? Today we might put this in terms of something like entropy. If the universe has always been around, why is there such a low entropy? Wouldn't everything essentially be in a heat death? Okay, that's a good question. So for Aristotle, the essences of things, the order, the design that obviously exists within nature, has always been around. Okay, so what continually actualizes or keeps in existence that design, those essences which are in things? If you want to put it in a different way, if you think of the Platonic forms, Aristotle believes that those forms are in things. Okay, and it can be helpful to actually look to the philosopher Zeno in ancient Greece to make some more sense out of this. If you're familiar with Zeno's paradoxes of motion, if you think, for example, the race course. Okay, so Zeno, trying to show that change in motion is an illusion, posits this little thought experiment where a man he's going to run from one side of the field or side of a race course to the other, but before he can get to the other end, we would all admit that he has to go halfway first and get to the halfway mark first. But if you think about it, before he can get to that halfway mark, he would really have to cross the quarter mark first. Okay, well, if you think about that, he'd really have to pass halfway in between the start and the quarter mark, and then halfway in between that point, and halfway in between that point. So Zeno's point is that actually the runner never really moves because there's an infinite number of points between him and any other point on the race course. All right, another paradox of Zeno, the archer, okay, and the arrow hitting the target. Okay, so I should say the first thought experiment, okay, Zeno's trying to make the point that if you hold that the smallest unit of matter, okay, is some small amount, okay, or has some extension or quantity in space, you can always divide that into something smaller. And so there would have to be an infinity number of points between any 2 points. Okay, but that would make motion an illusion. Now, and going back to the paradox of the arrow, okay, the arrow, how does it cross an infinite number of points from the archer to the target? Again, same problem. If you posit that the smallest unit of matter has extension. On the other hand, okay, let's say you freeze it and you say that the smallest unit of matter has no extension, it has no value to get around the first problem. Okay, well then the arrow is frozen at any moment along the way, okay, in zero space. But if the arrow is in zero space at any moment along the way, well then 0 plus 0 is 0, and the arrow doesn't actually go anywhere. And again, you're left with the problem, then motion is an illusion. So Zeno's two paradoxes really put you at either extreme. Either matter is infinite, or matter doesn't exist at all. Okay, and it's based off of the idea that if something has extension in space or a quantity, it can always be divided, or if it doesn't, then it doesn't exist. Aristotle, as you know, finds a middle way between these 2 points, and this is where his idea of form comes in. There has to be something, a substratum of being which isn't extended in space, okay, but which is the essence or ground of that which we do experience as extended. All right, and so this would be the treeness, okay, the actuality of treeness, which is expressed in the physical extension of a tree. All right, or the dogness, the form of dogness, which is expressed through the extension of a dog. All right, so for Aristotle, there are these immaterial essences that make something to be what it is, okay? And this, again, is a middle way between everything being pure actual and infinite versus being purely potential and nothing at all. Okay, so in Aristotle's argument, then, okay, what holds these immaterial essences and things from going out of being if the universe is everlastingly old? Okay, and for Aristotle, the lower essences are actualized by the higher and the more perfect essences continually, everlastingly. Okay, so we could take, for example, here, living things. Okay, what is it that holds living things from going extinct or going out of existence? Well, he would say that the living things are actualized by nature itself, okay, and the nourishment that we get from nature. Well, then you might ask, well, where does the nourishment that we take from nature come from? Well, nature is based on its four elements for Aristotle: earth, air, fire, and water. Well, how do those four elements get put together in such an ordered and designed way in nature to nourish us, to allow us to exist? Well, that would have to be the celestial bodies which rotate, okay, and which spin the elements into their designed order. Okay, as you can see, we're ascending to more and more perfect beings of actualization and less of the possibility to be only potential. All right, well, what moves the celestial bodies, which don't change except for their place? Those would be Aristotle's unmoved movers, or these immaterial minds, okay, which continually move the celestial bodies. So they're even more perfect than the celestial bodies. And this all culminates, okay, in one ultimate unmoved mover who is the ultimate mind, okay, and who lacks or has no potentiality but is pure actuality, and thus is the actualizer of every lower form of existence, okay, all the way down to us, okay, and moves everything else without it itself being moved. Okay, so when we talk about this argument being an argument from essential causality, it has to do with actualizing the essences of things in existence. All right, now maybe you're thinking, okay, well, hasn't genetics and biology really explained away what maybe Aristotle and St. Thomas thought were immaterial essences, dogness, treeness? We think of like species. And that's definitely still a topic that's being debated, but I don't think you can get around Aristotle's idea that there's an immaterial form, not only in biology, but also in the physical world. Think, for example, of the most fundamental aspects of physics which we know of today: particles, okay, electrons, quarks, neutrinos. Okay, maybe some of the fundamental laws and constants like gravity, strong force, weak force, electromagnetic force, okay, vacuum energy, all that stuff, okay, maybe these most fundamental values. You can't really get around the fact that they have a form to them. A quark isn't an electron. There's something different about those two things. Okay, well, maybe say, well, we can maybe one day we'll break those things down so that they have some more fundamental existence. Well, again, even that is going to have a particular form to it. Okay, and even if you got down to reducing everything to one sort of homogeneous type of form, that homogeneous type of form has the potentialities to be all these different forms, electrons, quarks, and every other more complex thing that exists today within it. So that even most fundamental homogeneous form has all this potentiality and design and differentiation within itself as a form. So Aristotle's right, you can never separate form and matter. They're always going to go together. So there always has to be this immaterial ground to the matter of things. Okay, which, again, this is where the argument comes in, must be explained. The lower, that which is more potential, must be explained by that which is more actual. Okay, and this cannot go on to infinity. You must arrive at a purely actual actualizer of the essences of things, of the forms of things. And again, this isn't an argument in time. Okay, God's not one creature in time or anything like that. As the purely actual actualizer, God, as Aristotle points out and St. Thomas points out, can't exist in time at all. God has to be in a timelessness, changeless, immutable state. And so Aquinas really brings this out, that everything really doesn't matter if the universe is everlastingly old or will continue everlastingly. It all has a dependence, an eternal dependence, a timeless dependence on the timeless, immutable being of God. Okay, so God is the continual actualizer of all the forms at every moment, past, present, and future, regardless of how old or how long it is. Okay, I hope that made some sense. This is definitely a complicated argument, and I encourage you to look at these sources, which I'll post below in the description. But most, I think, helpful would be to look at Aristotle's Physics and Metaphysics in terms of how he's responding to the problems of the pre-Socratics. And that fundamental pre-Socratic problem being that they don't know how to explain the two fundamental realities of nature, that things are always changing, yet at the same time, the identity of things stays constant through those changes. Okay, and like I mentioned, that was brought out most specifically by the two extremes of Zeno's paradoxes. Aristotle finds that middle way, and in that middle way establishes the idea of form. And like I said, the idea of form is really something inescapable and is really at the heart of St. Thomas's first way from motion. Okay, the motion is a motion of actualizing the higher essences, actualizing the lower essences, all of which depends on one purely actual actualizer who is immutable, timeless, changeless, and all perfect. And this is what we call God.